How's it going today? I am excited to read you another chapter of Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. I just woke up, so that's why I kind of look nappy, but it's been a while since we've read this together. But I wanted to read some more because I'm enjoying the story and reading is fun. I hope you guys are doing well, and if you like reading, let me know in the comments below. This chapter is called Beautiful Boys and Glamorous Girls. Sumi was restless in the way of the living, but even for the living, she was fast. She was halfway down the hall by the time Nancy emerged from the room. At the sound of Nancy's footsteps, she paused, looking back over her shoulder and scowling at the taller girl. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," she scolded. "If dinner catches us without doing what needs done, we'll miss the scones and jam." "Dinner chases you, and you have scones and jam for dinner if it doesn't catch you?" asked Nancy, bewildered. "Not usually," said Sumi. "Not often. Okay, not ever yet, but it could happen if we wait long enough, and I don't want to miss out when it does. Dinners are mostly dull, awful things, all meat and potatoes and things to build healthy minds and bodies. Boring. I bet your dinners with the dead people were a lot more fun." "Sometimes," admitted Nancy. There had been banquets, yes, feasts that lasted weeks, with the tables groaning under the weight of fruits and wines and dark, rich desserts. She had tasted unicorn at one of those feasts, and gone to her bed with a mouth that still tingled from the delicate venom of the horse-like creature's sweetened flesh. But mostly there had been the silver cups of pomegranate juice, and the feeling of an empty stomach adding weight to her stillness. Hunger had died quickly in the underworld. It was unnecessary, and a small price to pay for the quiet and the peace and the dances, for everything she'd so fervently enjoyed. See, then you understand the importance of a good dinner. Sumi started walking again, keeping her steps short in deference to Nancy's slower stride. "Cade will get you fixed right up, right as rain, right as rabbits. You'll see. Cade knows where the best things are." "Who is Cade? Please, you have to slow down." Nancy felt like she was running for her life as she tried to keep up with Sumi. Those smaller girls' motions were too fast, too constant for Nancy's underworld-adapted eyes to track them properly. It was like following a large hummingbird towards some unknown destination, and she was already exhausted. "Cade has been here a very, very long time. Cade's parents don't want him back." Sumi looked over her shoulders and twinkled at Nancy. There was no other word to describe her expression, which was a strange combination of wrinkling her nose and tightening the skin around her eyes, all without visibly smiling. "My parents didn't want me back either. Not unless I was willing to be their good little girl again and put all this nonsense about nonsense aside. They sent me here, and then they died, and now they'll never want me at all. I'm going to live here always until Ellie Eleanor, whatever, has to let me have the attic for my own. I'll pull Taffy in the rafters and give riddles to tell all the new girls." They had reached a flight of stairs. Sumi began bounding up them. Nancy followed more sedately. "Wouldn't you get spiders and splinters and stuff in the candy?" she asked. Sumi rewarded her with a burst of laughter and an actual smile. "Spiders and splinters and stuff," She crowed. You're alliterating already. Oh, maybe we will be friends, ghosty girl, and this won't be completely dreadful after all. Now come on. We've much to do, and time does insist on being linear here because it's awful. The flight of stairs ended with a landing and another flight of stairs, which Sumi promptly started up, leaving Nancy no choice but to follow. All those days of stillness had made her muscles strong, accustomed to supporting her weight for hours at a time. Some people thought only motion bred strength. Those people were wrong. The mountain was as powerful as the tide, just in a different way. Nancy felt like a mountain as she chased Sumi higher and higher into the house, until her heart was thundering in her chest and her breath was catching in her throat until she feared that she would choke on it. Sumi stopped in front of a plain white door marked only with a small, almost polite sign reading, "Keep out." Grinning, she said, if he meant that, he wouldn't say it. He knows that for anyone who spent any time at all in nonsense, that really he's issuing an invitation. Why do people around here keep using that word like it's a place? Asked Nancy. She was starting to feel like she'd missed some essential introductory session about the school, one that would have answered all her questions and left her a little less lost. Because it is, and it isn't, and it doesn't matter, said Sumi, and knocked on the attic door before hollering, "We're coming in," and shoving it open to reveal what looked like a cross between a used bookstore and a tailor's shop. Piles of books covered every available surface. The furniture, such as it was, a bed, a desk, a table, appeared to be made from the piles of books, all save for the bookshelves lining the walls. Those, at least, were made of wood, probably for the sake of stability. Bolts of fabrics were piled atop the books. They ranged from cotton and muslin to velvet and the finest of thin, shimmering silks. At the center of it all, cross-legged atop a pedestal of paperbacks, sat the most beautiful boy Nancy had ever seen. His skin was golden tan, his hair was black, and when he looked up with evident irritation from the book he was holding, she saw that his eyes were brown and his features were perfect. There was something timeless about him, like he could have stepped out of a painting and into the material world. Then he spoke. "What in the fuck are you doing in here again, Sumi?" he demanded. Oklahoma accent thick as peanut butter spread across a slice of toast. "I told you that you weren't welcome after the last time. You're just mad because I came up with a better filing system for your books than you could," said Sumi, sounding unruffled. "Anyway, you didn't mean it. I am sunshine in your sky, and you'd miss me if I was gone. You organized them by color, and it took me weeks to figure out where anything was. I'm doing important research up here." Cade unfolded his legs and slid down from his pile of books. He knocked off a paperback in the process, catching it deftly before it could hit the ground. Then he turned to look at Nancy. "You're new. I hope she's not already leading you astray." "So far, she's just led me to the attic," said Nancy inanely. Her cheeks reddened, and she said, "No, I'm not so easy to lead places most of the time. She's more of a standing really still and hoping nothing eats her sort of girl," said Sumi, and thrust the suitcase toward him. "Look what her parents did." Cade raised his eyebrows to look at the virulent pinkness of the plastic. "That's colorful," he said after a moment. "Paint could fix it. Outside, maybe. You can't paint underpants. Well, you can, but then they'd come out all stiff and no one believes you didn't mess them." Sumi's expression sobered for a moment. When she spoke again, it was with a degree of clarity that was almost unnerving coming from her. Her parents swapped out her things before they sent her off to school. They knew she wouldn't like it, and they did it anyway. There was a note. "Oh," said Cade with sudden understanding. "One of those. All right, is this going to be a straight exchange then?" I'm sorry, I don't understand what's going on, said Nancy. Sumi grabbed my suitcase and ran away with it. I don't want to bother anyone. You're not bothering me, said Cade. He took the suitcase from Sumi before turning toward Nancy. Parents don't always like to admit that things have changed. They want the world to be exactly the way it was before their children went away on these life-changing adventures. And when the world doesn't oblige, they try to force it into the boxes they built for us. I'm Cade, by the way. Fairyland. I'm Nancy, and I'm sorry, I don't understand. I went to Fairyland. I spent 3 years there, chasing rainbows and growing up by inches. I killed a goblin king with his own sword and he made his heir with his dying breath. Made me his heir with his dying breath. The goblin prince in waiting. Cade walked off into the maze of books, still carrying Nancy's suitcase. His voice drifted back, betraying his location. The king was my enemy, but he was the first adult to see me clearly in my entire life. The court of the Rainbow Princess was shocked, and they threw me down the next wish well we passed. I woke up in a field in the middle of Nebraska, back in my 10-year-old body, wearing the dress I'd had on when I first fell into the prism. The way he said prism left no question about what he meant. It was a proper name, the title of some strange passage, and his voice ached around that single syllable like flesh aches around a knife. I still don't understand, said Nancy. Sumi sighed extravagantly. He's saying that he fell into Fairyland, which is sort of like going in a mirror, only they're really high logic pretending to be high nonsense. It's quite unfair. There's rules on rules on rules, and if you break one, wham! She made a slicing gesture across her throat. Out you go, like last year's garbage. They thought they had snicker-snatched a little girl. Fairies love making little girls. Love taking little girls. It's like an addiction with them, and when they found out they had a little boy who just looked like a little girl on the outside, uh-oh, dunsies, they threw him right back. Oh, said Nancy. Yeah, said Cade, emerging from the maze of books. He wasn't carrying Nancy's suitcase anymore. Instead, he had a wicker basket filled with fabric in reassuring shades of black and white and gray. He had a girl here a few years ago who'd spent basically a decade living in a Hammer film. Black and white everything, flowy, lacy, super Victorian. Seems like your style. I think I've guessed your size right, but if not, feel free to come and let me know what you need. Know that you need something bigger or smaller. I didn't take you for corsetry type. Was I wrong? What? Nancy wrenched her gaze around from the basket. No, not really. The boning gets uncomfortable after a day or two. We were more, Grecian where I was, I guess, or pre-Raphaelite. She was lying. Of course, she knew exactly that the styles had been in her underworld, in those sweet and silent halls, when she'd gone looking for signs that someone else knew where to find a door, combing through Google and chasing links across Wikipedia. She had come across the works of a painter named Waterhouse, and she'd cried from the sheer relief of seeing people wearing clothes that didn't offend her eyes. Cade nodded, understanding in his expression. I manage the clothing swaps and inventory the wardrobes, but I do custom jobs too, he said. You'll have to pay for those since they're a lot more work on my part. I take information as well as cash. You could tell me about your door and where you went, and I could make you a few things that might fit you better. Nancy's cheeks reddened. I'd like that, she said. Cool. Now get out, both of you. We have dinner in a little while, and I want to finish my book. Cade smiled was fleeting. I never did like to leave a story unfinished. Sumi watched Nancy as they walked down the stairs. The taller girl was holding tight to her basket of black and white clothing, cheeks still faintly touched with red. The color seemed almost obscene on her, like it had no business there. Do you want to fuck him? Nancy almost fell down the stairs. After she had caught herself on the banister, she turned to Sumi, sputtering and blushing, and said, No. Are you sure? Because you look like you did, and then you look sort of upset, like you'd figure out you didn't want to after all. Jill, you'll meet her at dinner, wanted to fuck him until she found out he used to be a girl. And then she called him she until Miss Ellie said that we respect people's personal identities here. And then we all had to listen to this weird story about a girl who used to live in the attic who was really a rainbow who managed to offend the king of the sky in one of the fairylands and got herself kicked out. Sammy paused to take a breath and added, "That was sort of scary. You never think about people from there winding up here, only people from here winding up there. Maybe the walls are never as impermeable as we think they are." "Yes," said Nancy, recovering her composure. She began walking again. "I'm quite sure I don't want to have sexual relations with him, and I don't think his gender expression is any of my business." She was reasonably sure that was the right way to say things. She'd known the words once, before she left this world, and its problems behind her. That's between him and whoever he does or doesn't decide to get involved with. "If you don't want to do the bing-bang with Cade, I guess I should tell you I'm taken," said Sammy breezily. "He's a candy corn farmer from the far reaches of the kingdom, and my one true love, and we're going to get married someday. Or we would have if I hadn't gone and gotten myself exiled. Now he'll tend his fields alone, and I'll grow up and decide that he was just a dream, and maybe one day my daughter's daughter will visit his grave with licorice flowers and a prayer for the departed on her lips." Her tone never wavered, not even as she talking about the death of someone she called her one true love. Nancy gave her a sidelong look, trying to decide how serious she was. It was difficult to tell with Sumi. They had reached the door to their shared room. Nancy reached a decision at the same time. "It doesn't matter whether you're taken or not," she said, opening the door and walking toward her bed. She put down the basket of clothing. She would need to go through it at more length to check the fits and fabrics, but it was already an improvement over what she had left behind with Cade. "I don't do that with anyone." "You're celibate?" "No, celibacy is a choice. I'm asexual. I don't get those feelings." She would have thought her lack of sexual desire had been what had drawn her to the underworld. So many people had called her a cold fish and said she was dead inside, back when she had attending an ordinary high school among ordinary teenagers after all, except that none of the people she'd met in those gloriously haunted halls had shared her orientation. They lusted as hotly as the living did. The Lord of the Dead and the Lady of Shadows had spread their ardor throughout the palace, and all that had warmed by its light. Nancy smiled a little at the memory until she realized Sammy was still watching her. She shook her head. I just don't. I can appreciate how beautiful someone is, and I can be attracted to them romantically, but that's as far as it goes with me." "Huh," said Sumi, heading for her own side of the room. "Then, well, okay. Is it going to bother you if I masturbate?" "What? Right now?" Nancy was unable to keep the horror from her voice. Not at the thought of masturbation, at the idea that this girl she had just met was going to drop her trousers and go to town. Ew," said Sumi, wrinkling her nose. "No, I meant in general, like late at night when the lights are low and the moon mantis are spreading their wings across the sky. And a girl's fingers might get the urge to go plowing in the fields." "Please stop," said Nancy weakly. "No, I will not be upset if you masturbate at night in the dark without telling me about it. I have nothing against masturbation. I just don't want to watch." "Neither did my last roommate," said Sumi, and that seemed to be the end of that, at least as far as she was concerned. She climbed out the window, leaving Nancy alone with her thoughts, the room, and her new wardrobe. Nancy watched the empty window for almost a minute before she sank into bed and put her head in her hands. She expected boarding to school to be full of people like her, quiet and serious and eager to go back to the lands they left. Not like this. Not Sumi, and people slinging around technical terms for things she didn't understand. She felt like she was trying to sail her way home without a map. She'd been sent back to the world of her birth, to be sure, and she'd never been less sure in her life. was held in the downstairs ballroom, a quiet, vast space made even larger by the polished marble floor and the vaulted cathedral ceiling. Nancy paused in the doorway, daunted by the scope of it and by the sight of her classmates, who dotted the tables like so many knickknacks. There were seats for hundreds of students, maybe more, but there were only 40 or so in the room. They were so small and the space so big. It's rude and lewd to block the food. It's rude and lewd to block the food, said Sumi, shoving past her. Nancy was knocked off balance and stumbled over the threshold into the ballroom. Silence fell as everyone turned to look at her. Nancy froze. It was the only defense mechanism she had learned from her time among the dead. When she was still, the ghosts couldn't see her to steal her life away. Stillness was the ultimate protection. A hand settled on her shoulder. "Ah, Nancy, good," said Eleanor. "I was hoping I'd run into you before you reached a table. Be a good girl and escort an old woman to her seat." Nancy turned her head. Eleanor had changed for dinner, trading electric orange trousers and rainbow sweater for a lovely sheath dress made from tie-dyed muslin. It was shockingly bright. Much like the sun, it hurt Nancy's eyes. Still, she offered her arm to the older woman, unable to think of anything else that would fit the laws of propriety. "How are you and Sumi getting on?" asked Eleanor as they walked toward the tables. "She's very abrupt," said Nancy. "She lived in a high nonsense for almost 10 years subjective time. And much as you learn to be still, she learned never to stop," said Eleanor. "Stopping is what got people killed where she was. It was very close to where I was, you see, so I understand her better than most. She's a good girl, so she won't steer you wrong." "She took me to meet a boy named Cade," said Nancy. Oh, it's unusual for her to start making introductions that quickly, unless... Did you have trouble with your clothing? Was what you packed not what you found in your suitcase?" Nancy didn't say anything. Her reddening cheeks and averted eyes said it all. Eleanor sighed. "I'll write your parents and remind them that they agreed to allow me to guide your therapy. We should be able to have whatever they removed from your suitcase mailed here within the month. In the meantime, you can go back to Cade for whatever you need. The dirt boy is a whiz with a needle. I don't know how we got along without him." Sumi said he'd been to something called a high logic world. I still don't understand what any of those words mean. You throw them around like everyone knows them, but they're all new to me. "I know, dear. You'll have therapy tonight and the proper orientation with Landy tomorrow, and she'll explain everything." Eleanor straightened as they reached the tables, taking her hand from Nancy's arm. She clapped twice. All conversation stopped. The students seated there, most with spaces between them, a few in tight conversational knots that left no visible way in, turned to look at her, faces expectant. "Good evening, everyone," said Eleanor. "By now, some of you have doubtlessly heard that we have a new student with us. This is Nancy. She'll be rooming with Sumi until one of them attempts to murder the other. If you'd like to place a bet on who kills who, please talk to Cade." Laughter from the girls, and they were overwhelmingly girls, Nancy realized. Apart from Cade, who was sitting by himself with his nose buried in a book, there were only 3 boys in the entire group. It seemed odd for co-ed school to be so unbalanced. She didn't say anything. Eleanor had promised her an orientation, and maybe everything would be explained here, making questions unnecessary. Nancy was still adjusting to being back in the world after her travels, so please be gentle with her for the first few days, even as all of us were gentle with you. Once upon a time. There was a thin line of steel in Eleanor's words. When she's ready to join in with the hurly-burly and the cheerful malice, she'll let you know. Now eat up, all of you, even though you may not want to. We are in a material place. Blood flows in your veins. Try to keep it there. She stepped away from Nancy, leaving her anchorless as she walked away. dinner was set up buffet style along its one wall. Nancy drifted over to it, recoiling from the braising dishes of meat and baked vegetables. They would sit like stones in her stomach, too heavy and unforgiving to tolerate. In the end, she filled a plate with grapes, slices of melon, and a scoop of cottage cheese. Picking up a glass of cranberry juice, she turned to consider the tables. She'd been good at this once. She'd never been one of the most popular girls in her high school, but she'd understood the game enough to play it and play it well, to read the temperature of the room and find the safe shallows where the currents of Mean Girls' intensity wouldn't wash her away, but where she wouldn't risk drowning in the brackish tide pools of the outcasts and the unwanted. She remembered a time when it had mattered so much. Sometimes she wished she knew how to get back to the girl who'd cared about such things. Other times she was grateful beyond words that she couldn't. The boys, except for Cade, were all sitting together, blowing bubbles in their milk and laughing. No, not them. One group had formed around a girl who was so dazzlingly beautiful that Nancy's eyes refused to focus on her face. Another had formed around a punch bowl filled with candy pink liquid from which they all fervently sipped. Neither looked welcoming. Nancy looked around until she found the only safe harbor she was likely to see and started in that direction. Sumi was sitting across from a pair of girls who couldn't have looked more different, or more alike. Her place was piled high with no concern for what touched what. Gravy-covered melon slices cascade into roast beef coated in jam. The sight of it made Nancy's stomach flip, but she still put her plate down next to Sumi's, cleared her throat, and asked the ritual question, "Is this seat taken?" Sumi was just explaining how you're the most boring cardboard parody of a girl ever to walk this world or any other, and we should all feel sorry for you, said one of the strangers, adjusting her glasses as she turned to look at Nancy. That makes you sound like my kind of person. Please sit and relieve some of the tendum for our table. Thank you, said Nancy and settled. The strangers wore the same face in remarkably different ways. It was amazing how a little eyeliner and a downcast expression, or a pair of wire-framed glasses and a steely gaze could transform what should have been identical into something distinct and individual. They both had long blonde hair, freckles across the bridges of their nose, and narrow shoulders. One was dressed in a white button-down shirt, jeans, and a black vest that managed to come across as old-fashioned and fashion-forward at the same time. Her hair was tied back, no nonsense and no frills. Her only adornment was a bow tie patterned with tiny biohazard symbols. The other wore a flowing pink dress with low-cut bodice and a truly astonishing number of lace flourishes. Her hair hung in low curls the size of soup cans, gathered at the back with a single pink ribbon. A matching ribbon was tied around her neck like a makeshift choker. Both appeared to be in their late teens with eyes that were much older. I'm Jack, short for Jacqueline, said the one in the glasses. She pointed to the one in pink. This is Jill, short for Jillian, because our parents should never have been allowed to name their own children. You're Nancy. Yes, said Nancy, unsure of how she was expected to respond. It's nice to meet you both. Jill, who otherwise was neither moved nor spoken since Nancy approached the table, turned her eyes toward Nancy's plate and said, You aren't eating much. Are you on a diet? No, not really. Nancy hesitated before shaking her head and saying, My stomach's upset from the trip and the stress of everything. Am I the stress, or am I everything? Asked Sumi, picking up a jam-sticky piece of meat and sticking it in her mouth. Around it, she continued, I guess I could be both. I'm flexible. I'm on a diet, said Jill proudly. Her plate contained nothing but the rarest strips of roast, some of them so red and bloody that they were virtually raw. I eat meat every other day and spinach the rest of the time. My blood is so iron-rich you could set a compass by it. That's, very nice, said Nancy, looking to Sumi for help. She'd known girls on diets her entire life. Iron-rich blood had rarely, if ever, been their goal. Most of them had been looking for us smaller waists, clearer complexions, and richer boyfriends, spurred on by a deeply ingrained self-loathing that had been manufactured for them before they were old enough to understand the kind of quicksand they were sinking in. Sumi swallowed. Jack and Jill went up the hill to watch a bit of slaughter. Jack fell down and broke her crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Jack looked long-suffering. I hate that rhyme. And that's not what happened at all, said Jill. She turned to Beam and Nancy. We went to a very nice place, and there were very nice people who loved us very much. But there was a little problem with the local constabulary, and we had to come back to this world for a while, for our own safety. What have I told you about abusing the word very? Asked Jack. She sounded tired. Jack and Jill were more stupid. Stupid girls, said Sumi. She stabbed a slice of melon with her fork, splashing gravy on the table. They think they're going back, but they're not. Those doors are closed now. Can't go high, logic. High wicked if you're not innocent. The wicked doesn't want people it can't spoil. I don't understand anything you people say, said Nancy. Logic, nonsense, wicked. What do those things mean? They're directions, or the next best thing, said Jack. She leaned forward, dragging her index finger through the wet ring left by the base of a glass and using the moisture to draw a cross on the table. Here in the so-called real world, you have north, south, east, and west, right? Those don't work for most of the portal worlds we've been able to catalog. So we use other words: nonsense, logic, wickedness, and virtue. There are smaller subdirections, little branches that may or may not go anywhere, but those four are the big ones. Most worlds are either high nonsense or high logic, and then they have some degrees of wickedness or virtue built into their foundations from there. A surprising number of nonsense worlds are virtuous. It's like they can't work up the attention span necessary for anything more vicious than a little mild naughtiness. Jill gave Nancy a sidelong look. Did that help at all? Not really, said Nancy. I never thought that, I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland when I was a kid, and I never thought about what it would be like for Alice when she went back to where she'd started. I figured she'd just shrug and get over it, but I can't do that. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in the real world, in the real bed, in my real room, and all of this is a dream. It isn't home anymore, is it? Asked Jill gently. Nancy shook her head, blinking back tears. Jill reached across the table to pat her hand. It gets better. It never gets easy, but it does start to hurt a little less. How long has it been for you? Just under 2 months, 7 weeks, 4 days since the Lord of the Dead had told her she needed to be sure. 7 weeks, 4 days since the door to her chambers had opened on the basement she left behind so long before, and the house she thought she'd left behind forever. 7 weeks, 4 days since her screaming had alerted her parents to an intruder, and they had come pounding down the steps, only to sweep her into an unwanted embrace, bawling about how upset they'd been when she disappeared. She'd been gone for 6 months. From their perspective, 1 month for each of the pomegranate seeds that Persephone had eaten back at the beginning of things. Years for her and months for them. They still thought she was dyeing her hair. They still thought she was eventually going to tell them where she'd been. They still thought a lot of things. It gets better, repeated Jill. It's been a year and a half for us, but we don't lose hope. I keep my iron levels up. Jack has her experiments. Jack didn't say anything. She just stood and walked away from the table, leaving her half-eaten dinner behind. You're not cleaning up after you. We're not cleaning up after you, shouted Sumi around a mouthful of food. In the end, of course they did. There was really no other option. Alright guys, that was chapter 2 of Every Heart a Doorway. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry the video quality on these is not great. I'm using a webcam, so I do the best I can, I am saving up for a better camera, but, I don't know how long that'll take. But But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Excuse me. I hope to read more in the future. There's only a few chapters in this book. We're that far in, if you can tell. And yeah, I hope you guys are staying safe out there and having a blessed, wonderful, beautiful day or night or evening, whatever. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Like this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.